you're seeing a lot of increased identity where people are like, I identify as XYZ, but there's, in my opinion, some level of wanting and needing extreme validation. Mm-hmm. And as I said before, in terms of online dating, we are at a point where you're constantly getting rejected 24/7 if you're online dating. So with that in mind, you see people being more experimental with their sexuality, but that's also a reflection of how much we are looking for validation from everyone and everything. Mm-hmm. You look at social media, the study after study that shows it causes narcissistic tendencies with people.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Pranzata Podcast. This is your host, Andrea Pranzatelli. This is episode number 149 on the Pranzata Podcast. We have a new guest today. Today's guest is Alex Csedrik. Alex is an author. He just recently released a book called Mars is for Millennials, and we're here today to discuss the book. So before we get into it, if you are new to this channel, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, this is a very interactive channel. I like to know what the listeners have to say. So leave your comments in the comment section below for anything that comes up on the episode. I do read the comments and I respond as much as I possibly could. Okay, so just getting right into it, I want to hear about your book. First of all, congratulations. That's really exciting. Is that your first ever book, or have you written books before?
Thank you, Andrea. First of all, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, sure.
So actually, this is technically my second book because I published a novella when I was 17, 18. It's very bad, but I published it. And then this is the second edition of Mars is for Millennials. So this one's actually called the Glow Up Edition. The first one was published in 2022. So I don't know what the gray area is, if this is the second, like 2A, or if this is number 3. But that I've published before.
Yeah. Okay. So Mars is for Millennials. That's a very interesting title. So if for anybody listening, if you were going to introduce what the book is about, give me a little rundown of what I can expect in this book.
Yeah, it's a science fiction satire, short story collection that focuses on all the issues that we're dealing with in society today. It talks about relationships, politics, technology, a lot of issues like that. I started writing this book actually in my early to mid 20s. Mm-hmm. And I would say the first version was done by my late 20s. The second version was done by my early 30s. I added a few more stories. And then the first edition, that was published, like I said, in 2022. So that version was probably done in my early to mid 30s. And then this one, I added 4 more new stories. So this book, weirdly enough, spans like 15 years of my life. So there's a range of topics from that quarter-life crisis, themes of identity, existential crisis in general, and as I said, what's happening in the world today. So a lot of shifts in politics, how society views art, your place in society, all those things. So it hopefully it tackles a lot in a very funny way.
Okay, I do have a lot of questions about all these individual topics.
Yeah.
But before I get to that, it's interesting that you said you've been writing it for a long time. So if the book is about issues today, did you have to change the book as you went along and go back and edit? Like, because I can imagine emerging technology probably changed some of your opinion. And, people's opinions don't stand true like their whole lives. They're always evolving. So did you have to go back and say, oh, actually, I changed my mind about this,
Yeah, Andrea, that's a great question. And it's a really weird phenomenon. And I don't mean this to like pat myself on the back or in any way, shape or form, but I wrote stories. As I said, I finished this first draft in my mid to late 20s. So I wrote 2 stories in particular. One's called Character Assassination and one's called Election 2024. And both were set far enough in the future that I thought, okay, I can talk about things that really won't affect or reflect necessarily the day-to-day happenings of what's going on today. And then it turns out that what I wrote was very prescient and actually came to life. And certain issues that happened in this recent election cycle literally were featured in my book. And now it's one of those decisions where it's like, now the book has a whole different layer and meaning of things that I didn't necessarily intend it to have. So do I lean into that? Do I edit it and pull back? I didn't know what the right answer was. Ultimately, in certain instances, I leaned into it. And then other instances, I kind of left it alone and let the reader decide how they want to interpret what I was saying, what their opinions are of what's happening, things like that. So it's been a very interesting thing to experience. It's also still quite cool too, because the first two stories that I wrote are the first two stories of the collection. And it is amazing how much they still resonate with me personally, in terms of what their intention was. So the first one is called PCC, and it stands for Politically Correct Cops. And then the second one is called The Interview, and it's an extended metaphor about how interviewing for a job can literally change your life. And so I took that in a very sci-fi dystopian take, and the story is about an interview where if you get the job, it's that you're going to survive the end of the world. And they're going to start a new planet with like one or two of every profession. So, I tried to take that extreme of how it feels, especially in your early to mid 20s. A new job could be the difference between, part-time salary versus, hey, I have some money in my pocket, I can do things. So, kind of that amplification.
I don't know if we're allowed to talk about this because I don't want to give away the book, like spoilers.
Yeah.
But can you at least give a little bit of what in particular about politics ended up manifesting as an actual reality that surprised you, or without giving too much away,
Yeah, so the one story, Character Assassination, was a play on the fact of how men in particular are very vulnerable to being taken down because of their indiscretions, because of their personal weaknesses, and their in a lot of cases they're flat out ignoring the law, specifically when it comes to sexual harassment. And it was at the height of the Me Too era. So it was really kind of a take on Me Too, plus the idea of how it can also be exploited to then take down your enemies, and kind of the cancel culture aspect that was really rampant for, that I would say that 4-year period of 2016 to 2020 and beyond. You could even argue that there's still remnants of it, or that it's still completely happening. That's something we can discuss later. But so that was the main point of the story. And then that's reflected in election 2024, because one party used the Me Too movement to get rid of a candidate that they didn't want anymore, so that they can run another candidate who they thought would win the election a little bit more easily. And so obviously that very much happened with Biden Harris. And I wouldn't have for the life of me been able to predict that was going to happen. Obviously not in sexual harassment nature or anything like that. It went, because of the aging issue, borderline dementia, etc. But it was still very applicable to what happened. And so that was an unintended consequence of writing that story and setting it at that particular year, that this just happened to come true now. And now the story, like I said, takes on this whole very new meaning that was not my intent.
It's funny when you put it that way, that this is a sci-fi story, and how our modern day is similar to a sci-fi story. Like, that's really crazy when you think about it. Yeah. And now, was that your intention when you wrote this sci-fi, should I say novel? Is it a novel?
So it's a short story collection. I'd like to think of it as almost a novel through stories, because it is interrelated. There are a lot of characters that appear in other stories. There are shared themes, shared plot elements. As I just said, those are two stories that are completely tied together. There are other elements in those two stories that tie into other stories. So it's technically a short story collection, but in my opinion, like I said, it does kind of have this novelistic approach.
Was it when you were writing it? Because I'm not sure, like the sci-fi genre, when people write sci-fi, and I'm sure you've watched sci-fi movies and stuff, if that's a big interest of yours, do sci-fi writers try to predict, like, are they like, this is what I think is going to happen in the future and I want to represent this? Or is it just total fantasy? Or is it like a combination of both?
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, I like to consider this book South Park meets Kurt Vonnegut. And so I was really just using sci-fi as the lens to allow myself to satirize what was happening and give it enough distance where people didn't feel personally attacked, so that maybe they can find a little bit more empathy is not the right word, but more, I would guess, common ground, and see that maybe there are certain things, no matter which political side you're on, that, man, there's a lot of lunacy happening and being argued, and maybe that we all have more in common than we think, and like, if you look at studies with social media, 10% of the users are 90% of the loudest ones, meaning that they're posting the most often. And so it leads us to believe that our society, specifically in America, that we all hate each other, but truly it really is like just these fringe, the extreme right and the extreme left, who are just the loudest, and most of us have common ground, and then we're just kind of forgetting that we have common ground. And so that's kind of what my goal was, to make it sci-fi. Would I say that I was trying to predict the future? I don't think really in any story I try to do that. I try to, like I said, I tried to put future dates because I wanted to make it reflective of how I felt society was was going. But the future would allow me to cushion that blow, so to speak.
I want to go back to what you said about how, because the people on social media that are the loudest, it leads us to believe that we're more different than we actually are. We have more in common, like you said.
Yeah.
I actually do think, little by little, however, it's spreading that. It's kind of infecting the people who do, like, who I don't want to say normal, but you said, like, not the fringe people. I do feel like that is almost infecting the common people a little bit as well. Like, I feel like sometimes I know from personal experience, like, I have really good, kind-hearted, loving friends and even some family that will get in these aggressive political fights based on ideas that they saw on social media. And that might not actually align with their own beliefs,
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that. I was thinking about this the other day, and as we age, how friendships, relationships change, sometimes for the better, as they evolve, sometimes for the worse as they devolve. And the one thing that I think is probably the most prevalent is exactly what you just said, that a lot of times people aren't arguing with who they're arguing with, if that makes sense. They're actually arguing against an ideology. They're like, so if you have a lifelong childhood friend that you guys have gone through everything together, and when you're maybe teenagers, maybe you're right and they're left, or you're left and they're right. When you're teenagers, you learn to have those conversations because you're like, hey, we can talk about this because you and I are different, and that's okay. In your 20s, you're still able to do that. But then as you get mid-30s and beyond, you start hardening in your stance. And I'm not saying that that's good, but it's what happens. You start hardening in your stance, and then it's not that you're arguing with people anymore. You're arguing against, like I said, that ideology where you're constantly being bombasted, whether it's MSNBC or whether it's Fox News. You're now arguing against that line of thinking and no longer having the conversation with your friend. So when you and your friends have a discussion and you don't agree, it escalates very quickly because it's, again, threatening your ideology, one, but two, you forget that you're talking to a friend that you can have disagreements with, and now you're talking to all the negative comments that you've seen online. You're talking to all the authority figures that are speaking about this issue. And it's fascinating to me because obviously that's why we're seeing really the degradation of relationships, whether it's romantic, whether it's friendships. Politics have never caused this much damage in terms of how our society functions as they have within the last 12, even to 16 years.
Yeah. Lately, not to interrupt, but I just want to get to this before I forget what you said about everything you said, really. Lately, I'm obsessed with learning about power dynamics. Like I'm reading a lot of I'm reading 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, and I'm like watching CIA. Like I'm really into like CIA podcasts, like learning manipulation tactics. It makes me sound like a psycho. I promise I'm not using it to manipulate my friends, but I'm one of the questions I have that I feel like I'm trying to figure out is why are people so threatened by different ideas? Like, have you ever thought of that? Like, is it just purely an egotistical thing? It's like, if you threaten this idea, you're threatening my power. Like, what's the power? Like, I'm like fascinated. Like, why is there so much power behind people's ideas? I don't know if that's something you've explored or thought about in your book, you know?
Yeah, I've definitely thought about that. I don't know if it's always power. I think it's more identity. So the idea comes down to, let's say I identify as a Democrat, or let's say I identify as a Republican. Either one, it doesn't really matter. This is not a one side, it's all sides. If your identity is based on that viewpoint, and now someone has challenged that viewpoint by disagreeing with you and saying, hey, I can't believe that the Dems or the Republicans did this. How silly of them, right? Yeah. Now you take that as they're calling me silly. They're calling me stupid. How dare that person come into my home? Or how dare they, after all we've been through, they were calling me stupid because I thought that, you know, and that's where it ultimately comes to. There's a book that I had to read for work, Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And it's the whole idea of, again, identity. So if you have a narrow identity, like if, you know, as someone who's done stand-up comedy, myself, and I know you do stand-up comedy. So if you identify as a comedian, and if someone says to you, you're not funny, you don't roll that off right away, because if you identify as a comic and your whole personality is based on that identity, if you're not funny, then your personality and your identity is gone. So it's not a comment that you take lightly. So if you just, like, as an example, if you identify instead of as a comic as someone who likes to create, you're not as tied to that specific feedback or that specific comment anymore. Because if you say, oh yeah, you know, I like to create, I try stand-up comedy, I do stand-up comedy, oh, maybe I'm not that good at it, oh well, I have fun with it. If someone says you're not good at it, you're like, yeah, you're right, I enjoyed it, you know? Like it's really, again, it comes back to that identity, in my opinion anyway.
I never thought of that it really isn't a power. It's not even wanting to be in power. The idea of, I think for a lot of people, losing your identity in some way is a really painful experience. And some people are unwilling to let that go, you know? Yeah. And I think that might be a common human experience, but I also think it's really holding people back.
Oh, absolutely.
If that's true, it's really holding people back. Because I think there, speaking of power, I think there is a lot of power in being like, okay, a lot of people will criticize certain figures or certain podcasters or whatever for changing their minds over the years. Yeah. They'll be like, that person's not consistent. They said that last year and now they're saying this year. It's like, well, no, that's actually good because I mean, of course, there could be a manipulative reason why they do that. Yeah. But if it's purely they change their mind, it's like, no, that's good. That means they're not attached to their identity. They're willing to evolve and change their opinions throughout the years. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but
yeah, I mean, I wish I had written a story about this. You know, that's one of the things that I find so weird. I think you're absolutely right. I think that is a great trait, to be able to admit that you openly admit that you changed your mind on an issue or in a lot of regards. I think that there's an actual power and strength to that. Yeah. I think it's so weird that our society, we have people on X, Facebook, whatever, that are combing through people's past social media profiles to find discrepancies. And I get how that could be really important when it comes to politics, because you truly do have to be careful, because people will say and do anything to get elected. And then once elected, they'll completely change who they are. So I get how that, in that particular instance, that's important. But, a podcaster who hopefully his role is to shape a conversation, to engage the guest and keep their audience questioning, hopefully growing, understanding new concepts. Changing your mind is a great thing. It's not a bad thing. And so if you talk to someone a year ago and you had the same conversation, or if you talk to someone a year from now and, you had the same exact conversation, and if some way or shape or form I influenced a new opinion that you have, I think that's amazing for you. I don't know anything that I'll say that will do that, but I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that is a true sign of growth. I think everyone should look to constantly be evolving, because as you experience life more and more, you learn more and more of, one, what you value, two, what expectations versus reality are, and three, how that fits into what you want to accomplish moving forward. So
and on top of that, to question your own opinions, to constantly be questioning your own opinions without just taking it word for word. Be like, okay, let me look at my opinions, take a look at myself, kind of like check in with yourself. I do that all the time. Like I try to check in with myself and that sort of thing. So
I think that's great. It's a great skill set. I mean, I talk to myself all the time too. I don't know that I'm checking in, more so, lambasting myself, but I do talk to myself.
I do as well. I'm definitely talking to myself. Okay, so I want to touch on, that's the political end of things. I want to touch on some of the other subjects you mentioned in your book. So remind me, you said relationships, politics was one, but you also said relationships, and name a few of the other. Technology.
Like I said, I also talk about that quarter life crisis. I mentioned that earlier with the interview. I have so I'll kind of run through some basic synopses of some of the stories, and then we could go wherever you want to go. So I have one or two stories in particular that talk about dating. One specifically about online dating. I kind of said it with a Greek mythology metaphor, but I talk about how, because of online dating, we are now led to believe that there's endless opportunities, that we can swipe right to find the perfect match. So I make it like a Sisyphean task where, the online person, and it's literally Sisyphus, and he's called Psy in the short story collection, creates an online dating profile, and, he's banished by the gods to forever just keep swiping right till he finds his perfect match. So that was based on, personal experiences. I remember, I don't think it's still around anymore, but I remember OkCupid, where they would do that dating compatibility percentage, where it'd be like 92%, 86%, yada, yada, yada. And there'd be like somewhere it's like 97%. And you just think about that idea where it's like, okay, I matched with someone with 86%, but also this person has 92%. Is 86% good enough? And so you constantly are like thinking like that. And we're trained to think like that to a degree, because again, just like anything, apps are based on, one, your dopamine, the hit that it creates, two, your engagement with that app. So they want you to stay on the app. And there have been studies that showed how a lot of these apps purposefully set you up with people that are not compatible with you, because they knew you wouldn't match long term and you would still be on the app. So that's one concept. I do another one about machine learning. Specifically,
before you get to the machine learning, I do want to touch on the dating app thing, because I have a lot of personal experience with that. I don't know, are you married or single? Have you ever done dating apps before? Personally?
I've done my fair share and then some of dating apps.
So I just took a break because of everything you said. I was running crazy after crazy on that thing. I've been single for like a year, and I'm finding it really difficult, even more than a year, like a year and a half at this point. I'm finding it really difficult to meet people in person now because of the way things are evolving into technological era. It feels awkward to just walk up to a person and be like, hey, you're cute. Like it feels weird now. I want to work up the courage to start doing that though. what you said about the dating apps and they're keeping you on there. I was on Hinge because I heard that Hinge is the one where you're supposed to find true love. But I noticed they never sent me anybody I was attracted to. And you hear a lot of men complaining about that. They're like, women have such high standards. I'm like, no, I'm really not like getting anybody that I'm interested in at all. But they would like, what they would do, you would get a certain amount of swipes per day. And then they would all be guys I had no interest in. Yeah. And then right when they said you're out of swipes, they would show me somebody that I actually like because they're trying to get me to buy it. And me and one of my guy friends, we tested it out because he's on Hinge, I'm on Hinge. We're just friends. We don't really have like a chemistry as far as like romantic chemistry, but based on who we are, we're both musicians. Like we kind of look the same. Like he's a brunette, I'm a brunette. Like we feel like we're like the same level of attractiveness on like the 1 through 10 scale. In theory, he and I should we should see each other's profiles on there. We were like, put your Hinge on. And we went out together at like a bar. We were actually like trying to be each other's wingmen. We're like, put your Hinge on. We were sitting next to each other and swiping and we didn't see it. Like we're literally next to each other. Yeah. We're sitting next to each other. In theory, like we would be the perfect match for each other right now. Like we're both, I'm a musician, you're a musician. Yeah. We're the same age. We look the same. Like what the fuck? And that's when we realized we're like, yeah, they're trying to keep us hooked. They're showing us people that are like kind of cute, but like we want a little more and they want us to pay a lot of money. On the other hand, Tinder, they don't really have a lot of fuckery like that, but they have a lot of fuckery people. They have a lot of crazy people there, but like they don't like, I've seen my friend on Tinder. Tinder is more honest in terms of not making you pay, but for some reason, Tinder has this reputation of being like, yeah, everybody's just here to fuck. Like nobody's here to actually fall in love with each other. And I could say from personal experience that that's been my experience. I've never found anybody on Tinder who's like serious about a relationship. So it's like you get one or the other. Either you have to pay to find love, or you can find endless options of even people that you think are attractive, but they're going to have some like crazy kink or like all kinds of weird stuff like that. So
yeah. And just to follow up with several things. So unfortunately, you're absolutely right. Most apps, not just Hinge, I think Bumble too, etc. You know, I live in a very small area in terms of especially people my age and in my similar circumstances. I'm single, never been married. You know, a professional career, things like that, and you would think that it wouldn't be hard to find too many people like that I'm interested in because there probably aren't that many out there. But that is exactly what's happening because, like you said, they want you to pay. So even if you're sitting right next to each other, you're not going to be ever seen by each other because until you pay, they want to entice you, as you said. They want to dangle that carrot and tease with the other people. Two, I forget the actual number, but I think it's that dating apps, women outnumber guys like 6-1 or it's some insane number. And so I know from my perspective, one thing I viewed it as, which whether this is true or not, I don't know, but I started viewing it more as a job application than a personal reflection. Because if you really think about this is what's crazy and soul crushing about online dating. You are literally being rejected at every second of your waking life with online dating. Because if you've swiped to start your morning, every second that they haven't swiped back to accept your swipe or whatever, you're being rejected. You know, it's not like Schrodinger's cat where it's like, you know, I'm both attractive and unattracted to this person. No, you are literally being rejected. And so if you're constantly waking up and the start of your day is that negative, oh, let me go on online dating and send out some messages. But, oh, by the way, I haven't heard back from anyone, or I keep getting messages from people that I have no interest in. It makes you start to devalue yourself. And with jobs, it was horrible. Now it's even worse now. So 95% of all applications never get seen. So when you think about that and you take that measured approach of like, okay, if I apply for a job and I don't get it, it's not necessarily a reflection that I'm a bad candidate. It's just, hey, it didn't happen that way. So it showed the importance of being one of the first and or early applicants, or knowing someone to have that from the door. Now, LinkedIn, it's crazy. LinkedIn has a 99.7% failure rate for job applications. So that means only 0.3% of people get their jobs from LinkedIn from applying.
Why does anybody even fucking have a LinkedIn?
Yeah, right? So what's the point of that app if that's the case? But again, I bring that up because all of these things do affect your psyche, and it starts to be a reflection of you. But, there's, as I said earlier, there's unrealistic expectations. We think we could swipe right forever and we're going to find the perfect match, and we just think there's endless opportunities, all this stuff. And one thing I found is that when I started getting much more specific, truly, about what will bring me happiness long term, that's when I started seeing more success. It's easy to say in your 20s, I want someone who's pretty, who's this, and like list 20 things. Yeah. And then as you age, you're like, all right, that's no longer that important to me. And now in my late 30s, it's like I have 3 things that are super important to me. Those are the deal breakers, but everything else, you truly realize it's negotiable, because does it really matter that you've never seen Arrested Development?
Oh my God.
Is that really the deal breaker?
There's this one, you might have heard of this guy if you're into this subject. Have you ever heard of the relationship psychologist, Ryan Terabin? Ryan Terabin?
I have not, no.
You should check him out, because he's a therapist, like he's a psychologist. I'm sorry. He's a psychologist, but he's really interested in the subject of modern dating. And you would find his takes probably really interesting, because it's very like cutting edge. Like he's kind of saying, he kind of says the harsh truth, not because he's trying to be harsh, because he's literally just observing what is. Like he's like, I'm not trying to be harsh. And one of the things he says is like kind of similar to what you said. He's like, people would have such an easier time finding a mate if they just got what they needed from that relationship and didn't expect them to be everything. So like when you think about it, what is one of the most important things in a relationship? I think it's, as cruel as it sounds, it's probably sex. Because like we have friends to watch Arrested Development with, you know what I mean? Like we have family to lean on for support if you have a good family. So like, why would you get into a relationship with somebody unless you wanted like a sexual relationship? So I feel like, if you like, not that, they have to be the hottest person in the world, but as long as there's some physical attraction there and they're a nice enough person, like they don't need to. The example he gave in his like YouTube, he had like a couple of YouTube clips. He said because he was a psychologist, he's like, I need somebody who can nerd out over psychology with me. And then after a while, he's like, wait, I have friends in psychology. Like I don't need a woman who's like 10 out of 10 and she's nice and she's loving and she knows psychology and she knows philosophy. It's like, no, I just need someone I can fuck. Like I just need her to be kind of pretty and nice, and that's it. I can meet those other like needs with friends and with family, or even by myself. I don't need anybody to meet those needs. So that's a really good point you make, because I agree with that. Yeah. And
Andrea, that's a great point that you just brought up too. And you know, obviously you're citing him, but that's really the mistake that I think, and it really comes to the romantic relationships in our lives, but I would also apply that to professional relationships. It's that mistake that we think that it has to be everything. Like, no one person is going to give you 100% of your needs. And that is an unfair and unrealistic expectation. And you learn this too, again, professionally. No job is going to be the perfect thing where everything is sunshine and rainbows and everyone gets along and your bosses are always super nice and, you know, you're valued and you're paid the best in the world and you get all these great perks. No, you have to compromise. And the sooner you learn to compromise without giving up what's truly important to you, that's the shortcut / cheat code to success. Because you see this all the time in relationships. You see this all the time in professional settings. It's not always merit-based. Sometimes it's just as easy as understanding the game, so to speak. And if you're looking for long-term relationships, it is literally just understanding these are my 3 deal breakers. This person hits in a positive way all those deal breakers, I have an attraction to them, that's a sound basis. We can go from there. That doesn't mean you ultimately have to marry them, but that means that you can get to know them more and more and more, and give them more of a shot than you would have said, oh, that person is only somewhat attractive and they're pretty cool, but that person over there is a freaking smoke show. So I'm going to go risk talking to this cool person to go pursue the smoke show, who may or may not have what I'm looking for. And again, this doesn't, I'm not saying that it's beauty or brains. Like it doesn't have to be and or. Sorry, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. It can be sometimes but you just have to understand that you don't always find the unicorns. And the people are posting on their social media or even on their dating profiles that they're the unicorns. Well, guess what? If they think and are explicitly saying that they're a unicorn, their confidence level is up here. They probably also have a lot of issues, and they're not necessarily going to settle for anything. So, in their mind, why should they? They're a unicorn. Why should they settle if you don't have a 6-figure job? Or why should they settle if, you don't have XYZ? So it's, again, the soul-crushing reality of unrealistic expectations. I don't know where that stemmed from. I don't know if that's a byproduct of baby boomers, whether that's Gen X. I don't know how it got to this point for society, but here we are.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about history, but I would imagine a long time ago, it was a lot easier to find a person. Like you probably just kind of picked one. Like in my grandparents' age, you know what I mean? Like they, as a matter, I mean, not that this is that there's probably a healthy line between these two extremes, but I'm pretty sure my mom's mom, she was Ukrainian, and I'm pretty sure her husband was in the military, and I think she was 16 and he was like in his 20s. And I think he pointed at her and he was like, "You're cute. Let's get married." And that's like literally how it happened. Now, like obviously we're a little evolved past that, but you're right. We're getting to a point where it's like, okay, we're going in the opposite direction. It's not you. It's almost like more useful just to point at somebody and be like, "All right, you're cute. Let's go."
And I do touch upon this in the short story collection. Well, think about that aspect, but then now think about, I don't know, you could start with Caddyshack, Animal House, whatever your poison you want to say, but you just think about the portrayal of what fun was or is. And it starts in college, portrayal of fun, insane parties, random hookups, gratuitous sex, etc. And then you look at the last 20 years, Sex in the City, as an adult, insane sex, high-end meals, luxury clothes, etc. So there's a trickle-down effect that happens where we think, oh, that's the kind of life that I want. That's normal. I want that too. And it's reflected with the marrying age increasing almost every year, the decrease in kids that people are having. And I'm not saying that you have to have kids or anything like that, but as a society, we need people to have kids because if we don't, we won't exist. So it's all, it seems to me that it becomes this Peter Pan syndrome where no one ever wants to grow up and accept that they have responsibilities. And so we're pushing it off later and later. And I do mention this, and I'll tell you the story in a second. And they're just pushing off responsibilities in like these new creative fashions more and more so that they can just say, okay, now I'm ready for everything. And then they think everything's going to happen. Like, all right, the career's in place. This is in place. This is in place. Now I can have my family and kids because my life's set up. Life doesn't work like that. It's messy. It's complicated. So I talk about that in a story called Arbitration. So the idea of the story is that millennials and boomers have to get together to try to find common ground. And both sides kind of like, we've done this before, why would we even do this? But then millennials reveal, well, we, in this physical meeting, we have COVID. So if you don't meet and discuss and meet our demands, we're going to infect you. And Gen X, aka, is represented through the mediator, Sandra Bullock, the actress. And so she has to mediate how they find common ground. And like I said, I mentioned that because I do believe that you're seeing a lot of increased identity where people are like, I identify as XYZ. But there's, in my opinion, some level of wanting and needing extreme validation. And as I said before, in terms of online dating, we are at a point where you're constantly getting rejected 24/7 if you're online dating. So with that in mind, you see people, and it's good, you see people being more experimental with their sexuality, but that's also a reflection of how much we are looking for validation from everyone and everything. You look at social media, the study after study that shows it causes narcissistic tendencies with people. And so I don't know if it's logical or not, but an obvious step in my mind would be, okay, if you're narcissistic and you think that everyone is going to find you attractive when you post selfies and things like that, well, what's the next thing? Okay, now people are finding me attractive, so I don't care who's finding me attractive. I'll explore it with everyone because I want that feeling of being wanted, and it's seeking that validation. So
I was going to say, I was listening to a podcast today. I don't remember if it was Diary of a CEO. I listen to a lot of different podcasts, so I can't remember exactly what it was. But they were talking about the way things are changing now with social media technology, that the new social currency is exactly that. It's like validation. Like that's the social currency now. Yeah. That's everybody's just aiming to get I mean, I'm not saying anything like, oh wow, that's amazing she said that. Like everybody kind of knows that, but even though it's obvious, it's like a commonly understood thing, it's still pretty crazy when you think about it. Like when you actually break it down, it's like, oh, the way everybody lives their life, like everybody, like it's getting to the point where our grandparents are doing it. Like they're on Facebook, like everybody's social currency now is like, or value, like the value in society is where people spend their time online. Like that's why apps want you there. That's why things like, what did you say? The job one? I don't even have one. LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn, even though it doesn't work, they're still probably getting paid just to have people on there. Like they're still probably getting advertisement money, whatever, just have people on that thing. So it's like the currency and the power now is in how much time is spent on certain apps and how many likes are you getting. It's like kind of crazy that controls our lives.
Absolutely. And so I actually, that's another aspect that I bring up in a story. I have a story that, again, this is my sci-fi collection. So there's a mass shooting that takes place on a planet on Venus. And so it's a satirical take on this because mass shootings, death in general, obviously very serious topic. I think the way that society responds to them is one, very sad, but two, also completely farcical. Like the immediate thing that happens when we find out that a mass shooting happened, you immediately have people politicizing it. Like that's the first thing that people do. It's like they insert their take on gun control and blah blah blah. That is the first thing, and it's like, well, wait a minute.
Here's some dough for me to get likes on Instagram because now I can say my opinion, and my opinion's valuable.
Yeah, but what's scary to me is like, imagine if you're in this small town or you're in one of these places where that occurred, and you put your opinions on as soon as this happens, and you're friends with people whose child, whose mother, whose whatever have died in that incident, and you're like, are you serious right now? Like that's what you're first focused on? You're not focused on your friend or your classmate, your town person, whatever the relationship is. You're not focused on their well-being, or you're not sensitive to the fact that they're still very actively grieving to this tragedy. Like it boggles my mind that is what happens. And you think about whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's the Ukraine war, etc., when people put the flags as their profile pictures, and it's like, okay.
It's like you probably played video games all day. Like, what are you doing?
What did you accomplish? Like you literally were the keyboard warrior that you changed your profile picture and you're like, that's enough. I'm good. I did my part, like that's unacceptable, and it's just virtue signaling. That's all it is. And again, to your point, it's to get those likes, to get the dopamine, and then sometimes to monetize it for cash. So
it's like, I have mixed thoughts about it, because it's like, on one hand, it's horrible behavior when you break it down like that. But on the other hand, it's like almost not their fault, because these companies are trained to make people addicted to these things. So it's like, it's a little bit, I mean, I do have sympathy, but at the same time, it's also people's personal responsibility to wake up and become more self-aware,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know what will change that, what will start that. I mean, I think I think we have come to that. The pendulum, whether it's politics, whether it's anything, it always swings back and forth, and you always go too far one way and then too far the next, and then you always hopefully get back into the middle. I think we are at the breaking point with social media. I think specifically, there's too many studies that show the detriment that social media is having on kids in particular.
Teenage girls, rates. I've heard that that young women in particular, and it makes perfect sense, because there's all these, like, it's probably getting worse now. There's like AI models. Yeah. Like, I'm pretty sure there's like AI OnlyFans pages. Like, men are paying for women that don't even exist, and they probably don't even realize they don't exist, because they probably look so real now.
Yeah, and I don't think the men care.
Yeah, I don't think they care. They're just,
and that's kind of scary too, that they probably don't even care. They're like, again, you're my idealized version of what a relationship is. That's good enough. Like, I don't care that I'm settling for AI. I'll do that.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially if they're getting rejected. Like, if they're getting rejected, they're like, well, this thing isn't rejecting me. So
exactly. I mean, specifically for women, as not a woman, but like someone who's read these studies, like the body image. Dysmorphia and bulimia, all those body image effects are detrimental and, now exponentially higher because of the unrealistic beauty standards, where you have people there was one trend where it was like, oh, I eat 500 calories per day. And like the woman was an unhealthy weight. And it's like, that's not sustainable. No. And now you're trending for that. And it's like, I could see how this can become very dangerous. And, one of the stories that I did write about, so this is called The Selfie of Dory Gray. So it really is it's a teenage girl's perspective, or that's where it starts. And it is about that idea of chasing that dopamine hit through social media, through validation, through social media. Yeah. And, she posts the character's name is Dory, so it's a satire of the portrait of Dorian Gray, and so she starts by posting selfies, gets some likes, etc. Then a bully in her school makes fun of her for only getting 5 likes instead of 100 likes, irrelevant. But anyway, then she learns about Photoshop and how if she alters her appearance, she can get more likes. Yep. So then she starts doing that. And then the irony becomes very similar to Dorian Gray. She ages physically, but the online version of her never ages. It's the same youthful appearance. And so there's that aspect that I satirize, but also that idea of more and more people now just want to be influencers. But like, it's not to be an influencer to be like, oh, I'm going to launch cancer research. It's like, no, I just want to be an influencer because I want to do nothing. That's all I want to do. I just want to take pictures of my food, and that's all.
And I can say from the female perspective, like going back to like, because humans are competitive by nature, they keep having to switch things up to, okay, we've already done this. Let's try this to get the likes. The female bodies are getting crazier and crazier. Like, okay, we all like curvy women. Like, let's be honest. But they're getting to the point where it's like, they're like hourglass, like what one of my friends, she said, worker ants. Like, it's just like, okay, this isn't real. They're using Photoshop, or they're getting like a lot of plastic surgeries. And like, I'm thinking back to like the 60s where someone like Marilyn Monroe or Betty Page was curvy. But if you saw a nude photo of them now, they would be like nothing, like compared to, and like they were beautiful, gorgeous women, like natural. And like nowadays, like that would be like nothing. They'd be like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, that's lame. Like, what I mean? The bodies now are just getting crazier and crazier,
Yeah. So I used to be a college professor, and one of the classes we had the discussion about the Kardashian family. And
exactly.
So I said, and I like to do my classes where I didn't judge. I was never trying to manipulate anything or steer my students in any direction. I just wanted them to think. So I would let the conversation go where it was. I never brought my personal opinions into things. I would just, again, be that moderator or devil's advocate so that we could keep the conversation going. But one of the questions that I would always pose is, all right, so what are your thoughts about the Kardashians? Would you trade your life to be a Kardashian? And so if they said yes, I'd say, why? Oh, you have all this money. And I'd say, okay, but what about the privacy? You've essentially sold your soul to make $1 million, $1 billion, etc. Are you okay with that? You know, where's the line for you? Where does your humanity stop and your brand start? You know, like all those things. And that's something that I struggle with now, especially in this new modern age in life. Like, am I me or am I a commodity? Am I a personal brand? But anyway, so we would talk about that. And like, I'm always just fascinated by that. And now it seems more and more with a lot of the younger generations not caring and wanting to be influencers, that they are like, I don't care. I'm a product. I'll sell myself. I don't care if I have no boundaries. You know, I don't care about shame. I don't care about privacy, things like that. It's, I don't know if it's scary or not, but we're seeing it. We're living through it. And it's going to be interesting to see if that pendulum swings back the other way.
And what's even crazier about that is it seems kind of like what a useless society that everybody just wants to be an influencer. But the wild thing is that there's actually a market for them. Like the companies actually welcome it. They're like, yeah, do that crazy stuff. We're getting more views. It's like all the currency is now just like views. It's pretty insane. You know?
Yeah. I mean, as a kid, I wanted to be an actor. You know, I wanted to be a writer since I was 14 and 16. I really started being serious about it. So I get that idea of searching for fame in a sense, you know, and that, again, validation by everyone, which that's also something that everyone needs to examine. You know, if you're trying to be an artist, why are you trying to be an artist? Is it that you love creating, or is it that you're seeking validation that will never be enough? You know, if you want to be the influencer, the movie star that's like Mr. Beast, or I don't think I'm going to get the names right, but the D'Amelio girls, is that even close?
I know Mr. Beast. I actually don't know that one.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah. They're sisters. I know they had a reality show, but they were also on like TikTok or whatever. I don't know. I'm at the age in life where like you literally have to write why someone's famous when they're showing them on TV for me to know who they are. But it is like, yeah, you have to wonder why you're always doing this, and you're never going to be validated by everyone. And so if that's what it is, you're validated by no one or nothing, you know? So you can look at some of the most brilliant artists ever, and they all dealt with, well, I shouldn't say that. They all had undealt with trauma that they never solved or resolved. And that's why they always were striving to be better, better, better. And it becomes this interesting thing that we only think of workaholics as people in like boring jobs, professional lives. But there are so many artists that are workaholics, but we somehow romanticize that. You know, like a perfect example would be Heath Ledger, who unfortunately passed away because he was so committed to his art. Yeah. But we tell that as if that's a good thing. And it's like, you know, you can't take anything to an unhealthy extreme like that. Yeah. And that's something that's very dangerous, that's sometimes perpetuated in art, when it's like, especially if you talk about acting, method acting. Oh my God, this person was in character for so long and they dealt with all the trauma. You know, Austin Butler, who literally couldn't talk like himself anymore because he was Elvis 24/7 for like 2 years. Like that is unhealthy. And we're telling these stories as if like, wow, he was so committed. Like, no, that is workaholism, and that's not work-life balance, and that needs to stop.
Yeah, there's some influencers that I listen to that kind of toe the line of being very motivational, but also like, are you okay? Alex Hormozy. Do you know Alex Hormozy?
Yeah.
He's one that I'm like, he's actually very insightful and he helps a lot. But at the same time, I'm like, you might need like one day off a week, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's also that aspect where now and who I never thought I would personally be saying this, and I never thought this personally would be a thing, but there's also now toxic positivity where so it's especially prevalent on like LinkedIn, but it's this concept of everyone talking about how, you're doing great, and everyone like just being overly over the top nice and trying to show that they're empathetic. And, you see it a lot all the time now when a coworker loses their job, other coworkers are like, oh, you should hire this person. They're the best, blah, blah, blah. And it's really just become this idea that, life, I hope I'm doing a good job of explaining it, but it's this idea that everyone has to be continuously growing, learning, that we have to forgive ourselves. And these are all healthy concepts, but there's just an element of like, now everyone's being bombarded with them. And that if you're not working on something, if you're not fixing what's broken, you yourself are broken. It's a weird,
or out of touch, or you lose touch with the usefulness of some negative emotions, like anxiety, like we kind of what's the word when a doctor diagnose. We overdiagnose these medical symptoms. Like I have anxiety, I have depression. It's like, no, in some circumstances, anxiety is healthy and useful. Not all the time, but in some circumstances you need anxiety, or in some circumstances you need anger. Not every negative emotion. I mean, definitely not every negative emotion is a bad emotion. They're there for a reason. They exist for a reason, for our survival. And we still need to keep in touch with those. So yeah, the toxic positivity might have you thinking that you have to erase all negative emotions.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you nailed it. Like they're literally meant for our survival. They're instinctual. It ultimately comes back to, and I had kind of alluded to this, but there's that now weird thing of trauma bonding too, where everyone has dealt with trauma, and again, people are oversharing, and they're talking about, hey, by the way, I mean, I don't know how many posts on LinkedIn I see this. I didn't think I was going to share this because it was super vulnerable. I've been debating posting this for weeks, months, years, etc., but I'm finally brave enough to post it. And it's like this super personal post that I don't know for the life of me how that relates to your professional life. But it's also, again, I don't know what the end result is supposed to be. Like, okay, now everybody knows you've dealt with this insane trauma. I'm glad that you're dealing with it and you're addressing it in a healthy manner. But what was the benefit of you now sharing that with everyone? Are we now all... Do we unburden you of trauma? Like, do we now get a piece of your trauma because you've shared it with us? I don't know what it does, except ultimately back to my earlier point of just extreme constant need for validation. And that's all. And like now trauma, anxiety, labels, being labeled is now so in. And I think it's ultimately great that people are now more accepting of things, and we're not trying to hide things like neurodivergency. People talking openly about that, being slightly on the spectrum, I think is great. Talking about that. But like, again, we I mean, we are America, so we're not great with moderation, but we just always go to the extreme. Like, we don't know how to do this in a healthy manner where it's like, we talked about it, great. And now not like, oh my God, everyone has this too. Now everyone in America is saying that they have this, So
we all have autism now.
Yeah. So
yeah, I remember when the autism diagnosis was suddenly trendy for like people my age to just suddenly say they have. I had all these people coming up and telling me like, you have autism, right? I'm like, I do. Like, I didn't. Yeah, I do. I don't know.
Yeah, and then and how are they getting, like, they're self-diagnosing? They're reading very broad articles written by people like me, and then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, I have this because I checked some of these symptoms. Well, the symptoms are written so freaking broadly to prevent that company from getting sued and to prevent anything. So it's like 95% of the population fits most of these things.
I hate when people overuse bipolar. Because I have a family member, my mom, she's actually and she wouldn't mind if I shared, but she's actually bipolar. And there's a difference between I'm in a bad mood today I'm bipolar. It's like, no, you're just a human being. Like we all get grumpy. We all get irritable. We all get happy at one point of the day and sad at one point of the day. That doesn't make you bipolar. Like the reality of manic bipolar extremes, it's like, no, like when they go through a manic phase, a true person with bipolar, they're like, they don't sleep for days and days. It's like, like you don't understand how they die. They're like out roaming the streets. Like, it's like, like they're manic, like they're crazy. And then when they get depressed, they literally don't talk. They don't eat for like 3 months at a time. That's what bipolar is. It's like several months of extreme mania and then several months of extreme depression. It's like, no, you didn't have a bad morning and now you're bipolar. Like that's not how bipolar disorder works, you know?
Yeah, Tim Dillon has a great joke about that in his new special.
I love Tim Dillon.
Yeah, so do I. I have somewhat of a personal connection with him. I used to produce shows in the North Jersey area, in Hoboken, Jersey City, and in Bayonne, and he headlined all 3 of those shows. This was way before that he blew up, so I'm not trying to also like name drop, but like it was fun.
I had a feeling you would, because I know Sam Mushman somehow knew Tim Dillon. Like he was in the comedy scene when Tim Dillon was hitting New York mic, so he knew him. Yeah, so Sam and I are good friends. I was at his wedding. Sam and I used to live in Hoboken together. I used to produce a show at the Shannon in Hoboken, and for a 1-year anniversary show, Sam was on the show, and Tim Dillon was the headliner. And so I think that's how they met. If not, I know that they'd worked together and they continue to work together in other occasions. So I'm not just saying that's the only incident. But yeah, so he has that great joke about, schizophrenia, like, how anxiety, yes, it's real, but it's also like people can just say, I have anxiety, and versus like, well, no one's lying about schizophrenia. And like, that's, I don't know why we feel the need to like bond in that weird way. And it's, I don't know, because these things aren't negative. Like it's not, if you have anxiety, it's not a negative thing. Like that's life. It's okay. But I just don't get what we're trying to accomplish when. I think going back to, I've had thoughts about that too. And I think I know what it is. Going back to validation gets you success and money on whatever social media. Authenticity is very valuable now. And I think people are being inauthentically authentic, if that makes sense. So they're like,
that's absolutely right.
It will get me likes and follows and more essentially money. Cause like if you're a social media influencer, that's how you make your money. If I'm authentic. So now let me just tell everything I have to say about, and then it just becomes like a contagious social contagion is what they say, right? Yeah, no,
Andrea, you nailed it. I think that's absolutely true. The inauthentic authenticity, like that's, we literally just talked about that too with the toxic positivity. Like there are elements of this, and there are some people that truly believe, that they're glass half full people. And I'm sure that there's a lot, but like, it's now just become trends to follow. And so people are chameleoning, I think I said that right. Chameleoning these things that they view as success, and then they're just trying to adapt that to their own, which, I get it. Good artists borrow, great artists steal.
I was literally just thinking the same thing. I'm like, on one hand, I've heard that quote too. So it's like, you can't hate them, but it's overdone. Yeah,
exactly. So, and ultimately back to the original point, you still have to do it in a way that's authentic to you and not just doing it to chase likes or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we have been talking for a while. Before we end, is there anything else in your book, topic-wise, you want to touch on before we end the podcast? Is there anything you feel called to like, no, I need to say this before we end?
Yeah, so I want to bring up the title story of the short story collection, Mars is for Millennials, because it's really talking about almost everything that we've now discussed in this podcast. And before I do that, again, thank you so much for having me on this podcast.
Oh, yeah,
no problem. A lot of fun. I really enjoyed talking to you about these issues. But so the title story is really about never being fulfilled, always thinking you need the next adventure, you need the next this, you need the next that. And, we are a society that is constantly searching for dopamine because millennials, depending on whether you're an OG millennial or like a late stage millennial, or if you're now Gen Z, you grew up with technology at your fingertips, or it came into your life fairly early. So you're used to all these options, and now we are constantly searching for, hey, if I find on Netflix or whatever, I don't find anything that I like, so I'm going to go on YouTube, blah, 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 and we have endless options, but that is leading to a very much unfulfillment and will probably last for the rest of our lives unless it's addressed. And I don't know how, as a society, we address that. I know as a person how I address kind of those things, but that story in particular is really kind of the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak, of the short story collection, because it really does wrap up everything. And I think that's something that every person needs to be aware of, but specifically now the next generation, Gen Z, if they want to learn from our mistakes, that you have to understand that it's not always better. At some point, it's like, are you happy? Are you grateful? If you're grateful, then that's what leads to better. You just get the thing that you like and you get a deeper relationship with that, so to speak.
I can possibly foresee, like you said, the trends are constantly changing, the pendulum swings. I can almost maybe foresee there being like a spiritual generation. Like people are going to say, like, I need to go back to religion. Like, I can, not that I'm saying, like, I'm not really a religious person. I am a spiritual person. Like, I believe in a higher power, but I'm not religious per se. Yeah. I can almost see it becoming trendy to go back to church, because people might be like,
it already is.
Have you ever seen the Simpsons movie? Like there was this one scene in the Simpsons movie that reminds me of this. And I'm not like a huge Simpsons person, but this scene was still really funny, where there was some, I can't, it was so long ago, but there was some type of catastrophe happen, like something really bad was happening. And there was a bar and a church, and everybody, because they were all panicked, everybody in the church ran into the bar and everybody in the bar ran into the church. So it like goes to show, like, when you don't know what the fuck to do, just go in the other direction.
Yeah. And so I think there have been studies recently that are showing that people are actually going back to church because for whatever reason, and I'm not going to prescribe those, but I do think that one thing people need to realize, that I think it is great to believe in something other than yourself, and to know that you are a small part of this grand world, universe, however you want to view it. But you also need to understand that you have agency to change things that you don't like. And if you are only viewing the world as there's a higher power that will change the things that I don't like about me, then you're setting yourself up for failure. And that's not aimed at any specific religion, but it's just really more meant to address, you have to understand you have agency and you have to deal with your problems too. And then once you deal with that, that's how your life changes. Now, if you deal with your problems by saying, there's a higher power, this happens for a reason, that gives you the perspective to deal with things maybe in a healthy way. That's okay. That makes sense. If you're dealing with a higher power and saying, oh man, life, this happened to me, it sucks, I'm going to go drown myself in my vice because life's unfair, not okay. So
the way I view higher power is similar to, I was really influenced by the way Jordan Peterson explains it. So I don't know if you're a Jordan Peterson fan, but
I've heard of him.
Interesting about Jordan, he's very controversial, but interesting about him is that he's perceived as this very conservative figure, but he's never actually, like, when people ask him, do you believe in God? He won't answer. He'll be like, that's a trick question. He won't answer the question. So no one actually knows if he believes in God, but he describes the higher power being your own consciousness. So I believe that too. I don't think higher power I think higher power and humans are connected. I don't think it's like, I'm at the mercy of higher power. If I'm, if something happens, it's his or her, whatever, it's responsibility. I believe that your higher power, the way Jordan Peterson describes it, it's that little nagging voice in your head. Like when you're about to do something, you get that gut feeling.
Oh, absolutely.
That you have to act on it though, but it's there. It's there. It's just your higher, it's whatever it is that's in you that knows better, your intuition or.
Yeah. And one of the things that I find so fascinating about Jordan Peterson and this conversation. And this is not really from me being any political persuasion. It's just the reality. If you're a conservative figure, you're controversial. If you're an open liberal figure, you're widely accepted and nobody cares. So there's a dynamic at play that is completely off the bat unfair. Like if you think about that. So one side of the aisle is allowed to be completely open and honest about their politics, and yet another side of the aisle is automatically considered controversial. Like that is not the society that functions harmoniously, and it's an unfair balance. So I don't know if that gets rectified. Who knows? I don't know. But again, that's back to how we have to move forward. If we realize that we have more in common, and that okay, there's room for left-leaning podcaster figure, et cetera. There's room for a right-leaning podcaster figure, et cetera. If you don't like them, that's fine. They can still have their shows, and that's valid. I just don't have to listen to it. We have that in common. Then we get better as a society, instead of just saying, well, I don't like what they say, so therefore you have to get rid of them. You can't have them. You can't give them a political platform. You can't give them a platform to talk about. Like that's not how this works. First Amendment really is pretty clear about that's not how this works.
Sorry, my laptop is moving. My cat, I wish you could see what I see right now. My cat is literally standing behind the laptop trying to knock it over. So while you're talking to me, there's just like a cat's face right here. But
your cat's like, tell him to stop. It's over.
I wish I could turn the camera on because it looks so funny right now. He's just this little, I have a black cat and his face is just like standing right here staring at me while I'm trying to stop the laptop from not being knocked over.
Yeah.
But anyways, okay. So I think let's end on a good note. This was a great conversation. Before we end, is there anything you want to tell them where they could find your book? I can include a link below if it's on whatever, Amazon or wherever you sell it.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can find it on all major online platforms, Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com. Amazon, I know, takes usually 1 to 2 days to ship. So if they're ready, it's available. Again, it's Mars is for Millennials. This one is the new Glow Up edition. That's the second edition. So make sure you don't buy the first one, buy the second one. The second one is the book that it's always was meant to be. Yeah, Mars is for Millennials, Glow Up edition. And again, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This has been really fun to talk to you, get to know you better. And
yeah, my pleasure. It's been a great conversation. I will definitely, to you and the listeners, I will definitely be buying a copy of the book and reading it because I've never read a sci-fi book before. So this will be like my first experience reading a sci-fi book. I've never even watched a sci-fi movie. That's how crazy it is. So, but everything you said sounds really interesting and stuff that I would be interested in. So I'm going to give it a shot.
Well, hopefully you come away with not necessarily that you think that I view things this way or that way, but it starts conversation. That's the goal. I want people to just talk again. Art that creates conversation and understanding, not he's preaching this or he's preaching that.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of what you said there. Okay, so that's it. Pranzata Podcast, episode 149. Again, listeners, chime in on anything we talked about, any of the topics. If anything sparked interest, leave your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe as well. I'm trying to grow this podcast and turn this into a full-time career. So every subscriber helps me get closer to reaching that goal. And that's it. Have a good day, guys. Bye.